welcome to the Digital Possibilities panel, whatever that might mean. As written in the book that we have, we're doing an intergenerational panel of arts practitioners who explore the critical role deliberate exploration and practical research play in understanding and shaping digital technologies and culture. I would like to say there that I don't know what a digital technology is at this point, and maybe we will get to that question, but we're going to try to showcase the transformative power deeply engaging digital technologies can have on molding practical, aspirational, and equitable understandings of society and self. So that's what I think we are trying to do. My name is Stephanie Dinkins, and the way that we're going to do with this is we're going to show some work. We're each going to show some work. I hope that each of the panelists, I was going to introduce them, but I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and I'm going to give myself the burden of introducing me in the way that the world seems to understand me at this moment, right? And then I'll talk to you a little bit about why I think it's so important that artists are doing this work and the way we operate in the world. The Stephanie Dinkins that the world knows is an LG Guggenheim awardee, the inaugural, named to the Time 2023 100 People in AI, is a fellow of Creative Time R&D currently, and does a lot of work in terms of podcasts, speaking in public, spreading the word, what I would say seeding. I'm also Kusama Endowed Professor of Art at Stony Brook University, where I run the Future History Studio, thanks to Disco and the Mellon Grant. And I really see myself, if I'm talking about me, I'm a human who's trying to thrive in this world and get the communities I care about to be able to thrive in this world, right? That's my definition. And then if we're talking about artists, right, I think artists are change makers and emissaries, a place to help publics understand what deeply rooted topics are relevant to day lives. If we're thinking about AI, like, why is it important that we're thinking about this, right? Why should we be engaged or engaging the technologies that are coming at us? As artists, we can inspire people to care about pressing issues, and I hope that people already care, right? And we're just facilitating some conversations and have the unique ability to work successfully across diverse communities, right? So artists are people who can cut through structures that can limit the scope of discovery and change in institutional settings, in academic settings, in public settings. We get to be chameleons. I think artists is a really interesting position because we're welcomed into spaces, or at least we are hypothetically welcomed into spaces often, because the welcome is often not the reality of the situation. We look good in that space, but then what do you do with that positionality? And artists can also have the capacity to help make complicated issues more legible, emotionally resonant, and to help inject the concerns of everyday people into more siloed disciplines. For example, I often find myself in weird, big institutional players as that artist pet kind of thing, right? That artist pet kind of thing that then tries to get them to do something a tiny bit differently. I'm really excited to have Audrey Bennett, Hagar Massoud, Cezanne Charles, and oh, did I just do that backwards? I did, I'm sorry. Ria Rajan and Hagar Massoud. You would think I know my own students, right? But I always do this. And I'm gonna ask Audrey to start us off with her work and what she's been up to, and a little introduction. Take it away, Audrey.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm delighted to be here. Quite honored to participate in this conversation. I'm Audrey Bennett, and you can read about me in the brochure or visit audreygbennett.com to see my work. To summarize, I'm a trained graphic designer who's been doing research for the past 20-something years. My research Thanks. Thank you so much. My research concerns how the resources found in the grassroots, the heritage of indigenous knowledge, the new innovations such as hip hop and Afrofuturism, our community partners from Detroit to Dakar can have agency in technological development. I've applied this framework in many different domains: race and aesthetics, STEM education, poverty reduction, health campaigns, and graphic design history. Usually technology is introduced from the top down. Silicon Valley tech bros imposing algos on us. To reverse that, I developed the term heritage algorithms to describe the computational thinking that is already inherent in art and the creative processes of indigenous and vernacular artisans. We began by using heritage algorithms in STEM education and showed that they can also foster cognitive development in STEM and encourage creative expression in art and design, creating a sense of ownership of computing and math for BIPOC students. But this was only the first application. I then introduced the concept of design agency to expand this approach to many different domains and technologies. A phrase like participatory design is often too limiting. In a limiting sense, it can just mean tech experts holding a focus group. Design agency prioritizes financial returns to the workers, keeping humans in charge of their creative work and other forms of community regeneration that my partner in research and life, Dr. Ron Eglash, likes to call generative justice. Next slide, please. Oh, I have it. Now I have to learn how to use it. Was that right? All right, thanks. All right. Agency has been defined differently in various disciplines. In philosophy, agency is usually defined as the capacity to take action on one's mental decisions. It is considered separately from free will, since someone might express their agency on the basis of motivations that are caused by the will of someone else. Philosophers often use agency in the sense as something which distinguishes the consciousness of humans from the actions of machines or other non-conscious entities. Psychologists generally define human agency as the freedom of individual human beings to make and act on their own choices for the betterment of their lives. In educational psychology, agency has been associated with Vygotsky's zone of proximal development since we feel our agency most, those moments Csikszentmihalyi defines as flow, when engaged in activities that are neither too challenging nor too easy. Sociologists, on the other hand, often focus on the contrast between the agency of individuals, thus more closely associated with free will, and the social structure in which they are embedded. For example, the barriers we describe in the case of underrepresented students who do not feel free to engage in computer science education because it would cast them as nerds or violate other social expectations would be a case of blocked agency. However, we need to make a distinction between human agency in general and what we're terming here as design agency. Our concept of design agency is more along the lines of how Pickering describes scientific inquiry as the outcome of a negotiation between people, nature, and machines, rather than humans achieving their goals in a passive and non-agentic nature. Take, for example, graphic design, my discipline. The globalization of graphic design expertise, an example of what Friedman called flattening of the world or leveling of the playing field, and the perennial controversy over the ease and accessibility to industry standard design software for untrained laypeople has forced the graphic design discipline to grapple with the issue of human agency. Many people in many nations, despite a lack of formal training in graphic design, can call themselves professional graphic designers because they have access to the same tools that trained graphic designers use. Some have entered into the design playing field and are competing with professional graphic designers for freelance jobs at much lower rates. Rather than resisting the flow towards lay design as a threat to professional status and job security, as some have complained, Lupton shows how professional designers can participate in this trend, introducing a design-it-yourself framework which does not merely toss technology in the lap of lay users, but rather facilitates the ability of the do-it-yourself generation of desktop publishers to think more like professional graphic designers. She notes profoundly that access to technology is not enough. Knowing how professional designers think is equally important. Thus, design agency makes use of this sociological sense of human agency in relation to free will, but allows its mixture of synthesis with non-human agency as described by Pickering. According to Pickering, non-human agency in nature or machines lacks intentionality. But as it mixes with human agency, the resulting mangle can shift both human and non-human sides in unexpected ways. Design agency is always already a mix of human and non-human agencies, but the mix exists in a spectrum. With paint by numbers, tech imposes design decisions. Pencil sketching is at the other extreme, but camera technology has changed over time. From photography as art to the democratization of cheap cameras to today's illusion of mastery as platforms colonize our social networks, creating their empire of extraction. Thus, we need to consider our collective agency, our collective design agency as social beings. Otherwise, AI collaboration is nothing more than paint by numbers. Culturally situated design tools we created to tap into that collective sense of design agency. Students combine the heritage algorithms of traditional cornrows, quilting, and other traditions with their agentic creativity. As the student experiments with the changes in scaling and rotation, they're exploring the space of possibilities. As the student explores the space of possibilities, they're both deepening their understanding of the heritage practice and sharing out their results on the community site. Thus, the key to recovering our collective agency in the age of AI, designing systems that allow collective exploration of the space of possibilities. Currently, AI is not up to the task. For example, a class in Ghana took this photo of one of the students' hairstyles and asked ChatGPT to create a new version. The appropriation was instantaneous. As an example of a collective design agency, I will leave you with this project from graduate student Zita Echere. She has been recruiting Nigerian artists and designers for our platform Ubuntu AI, where they can license their images and data. Zita is now working with U.S. student Michael Nebare to develop AI that can collect each example on the platform in which some waste material is upcycled. It will then use this to generate new products that can be made with these materials. AI in this context is a kind of collective design agency amplifier, using Black upcycling traditions to create more just and sustainable futures. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. Next, we're going to have Hagar Masood. And I'm going to just tell you that this panel is likely to be messy as hell, and I love it that way. And Hagar's going to present some ideas and some work. Go ahead, Hagar. Is that Hagar's screen?
It's mine. Yeah, okay. So, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here and grateful to Stephanie Denkins and the Disco Network and everyone is here. So my project is about art, technology, and social justice. So mainly about female genital mutilation, trauma, accessibility, and using AI to create collective storytelling. So here we are gonna watch a video as a beginning. Okay. why?
Restart it, please. And tell us what it is.
This video is experimental. It's experimental video for why I'm hearing the sound here. This is experimental video work that is a seed for a project will be presented at the end of this year in Stony Brook, and it's based on collective memory and female genital mutilation, and discussions based on Facebook group, social Facebook group for women. It was like a community, and then it was shut down by Facebook. So I started to work with AI to generate collective memory and conversation with these women, but with anonymous identity. So here you can watch.
Still no audio?
حصل لك ايه يا نادية؟ اليوم اللي اتختنت فيه كان أسوأ يوم في حياتي وصعب، لكن الصمت مش هيساعد في إنهاء هذه الممارسة. كانت مشاركة قصتي في الترويج لهذه الممارسة قد تمنع نفس الألم في المستقبل. طب انت شايفة يا سميرة إن في طريقة يمكننا من خلالها تغيير نظرة المجتمع للختان؟ أعتقد تفكير المجتمع حول ختان الإناث عملية طويلة الأمد، ولكنه ليس مستحيلا. إن الناس في مجتمعنا لديهم آراء مختلفة حول الموضوع، بعضهم يعتقدها طقوسا يجب الالتزام بها، بينما الآخرون يعتبرونها تشويها للأنثى وانتهاكا لحقوق الإنسان. وهنا أيضا من يرى أنها ليس له الحق في التدخل في قرارات المرأة. تذكرت حين سمعت سؤالك كلمات امرأة تدعى نور شريف، قالت الختان للرجل. أنا شايفة أنه صح، إنما للبنات أسوأ حاجة في الدنيا بيه لختان الإناث وتوعية الناس حول حقوق الأطفال والإنسان. كما يجب علينا التأكد أن النساء لديهن الحق في اتخاذ قراراتهن الخاصة بشأن أجسادهم.
So this conversation, the source of it was based on social media, like women education Facebook group, group for women in the MENA region. They discuss everything in their native language, and it's mainly about sexual education, female genital mutilation, and more. I was member in this group in 2017 until early 2022 when they decided to close this group. One of the survivors here, she's talking about female genital mutilation, and the other woman is replying her with this, like they are arguing between that female genital mutilation has nothing to do with pleasure and sensation. So she's replying here, women who are arguing that FGM has nothing to do with lack of pleasure and sensation, exactly like someone eating beans all their life and never tasted meat and arguing that beans is the best. And here are more conversations from these women. I made sure to hide their identities. And this is one of them. She's sharing her story and how that happened to her. She's saying, my dad someday took me with his brother and his mother to the doctor to proceed with FGM. I was in grade 4, conscious enough about my body and its privacy. My mom didn't know about that. Then he allowed his brother to be with me together with the doctor. I was shy, and it was awful feeling to be exposed in front of men at this age. I still feel this feeling as it's just happened. Then my mom learned about it, and she argued that she argued with my dad, and he did not because he didn't notify her. Afterwards, she was pleased, and the family members and neighbors came to congratulate me and give me gifts. And it was feeling like it's more feeling painful when it's in the native language. And this is casted vulva for FGM survival women, and scanned in a 3D scanned. And then I was asking myself here, what did the Women Education Facebook group shut down permanently by Facebook? So the group was moderated by Egyptian American women. She lives here in the US. And the group was mainly discussing sexual education and intimate topics, all women together. And we don't have such a community in native language, and people are not always open to speak about this kind of experiences openly. So she created this group, and it was closed more than once by Facebook, so she always create a new one, until the last time she had to shut down it because they asked her to shut down her profile or to shut down the group. So she had to shut down the group. But I can say this group helped so many women, and they were sad for losing their place in this community, and it gave voices to them. And they helped me also to work or to connect with them, especially on trauma and female genital mutilation. So I was also checking on Facebook what is the regulation for Facebook on the MENA region, because this Facebook group, it was also like, it's against the Facebook community, Facebook guidelines, which is different than in the MENA region that here in the US. So there are certain topics that we are not allowed to discuss in the MENA region, especially in educational context, for example. We are not able to discuss these topics on social media or any platform. So it's politics, religion, and sex. We are not allowed even to work with students on this or encourage any projects relevant to this. Here, it led me to ask about how does trauma affect the human physically? So according to the National Institute of Health, hyperarousal, also known as a hypervigilance, it's a common symptom, traumatic experience, and primary diagnosed of PTSD. It reflects on sleep and muscle tension. So hyperarousal is also interfere with individuals' ability to take necessary time to assess and appropriate to respond specifically. So here I was wondering, is post-traumatic stress disorder considered as a disability? So based on a woman in the group, she was telling me, okay, trauma can make people stuck in their lives in certain places. For instance, a survival woman of female genital mutilation says, I'm stuck with physical activities such as sports, and as certain position triggers my trauma. So I can't enjoy workout done in lower level when my body is laid down on the ground or machine or seat. It means my body is in its less powerful position to protect me, so I only do cardio that keeps me standing in a strong defense position. As a child passing by FGM experience, I was forced to lay down on to lay down my body on the ground. They tightened my hand, they opened my legs widely. I was unable to protect myself in such a position. So this is how trauma is embedded in the survival body and how it prevents them from experiencing daily activities. Yeah, I just would like to speak about how AI. So here in my project, I'm addressing social justice issues such as female genital mutilation using AI based on Facebook group and the trauma and accessibility. I see that AI allows the survival women to speak in safe space and to have wider conversations, to be heard and seen somehow. Other spaces than the Facebook group and which is dealing with politics and guidelines. And one of the survivors that said, I have been in the Facebook Women's Secret Group since 2017, and I couldn't share any content to protect my identity from friends in the group who might know nothing about my personal life. So here, I created two women. They are Samira and Nadia, and
We're going to stop. Just because we have so many people to get to, so we're going to move on to Suzanne and we can talk more about it. Yeah.
All right. So my name is Suzanne Charles, and by way of visual description, I am an African-American female with shoulder-length, salt and pepper brown hair, medium skin tone, and I am going to talk a little bit about underimagined futures and how that enters into our work. But before I begin, I think it's worth noting that I have always had a portfolio career. I have simultaneously had a creative practice in studio, which I'll tell you a lot more about today, but have also worked for over 20 years building support systems and infrastructures for artists and culture bearers, particularly in Detroit for the last 15 years, but also working nationally and internationally around really thinking about what it takes to support individual artists as our sort of fundamental creative labor. I have always done that at the intersection of technology, both as a curator in new media, but also in terms of serving as our vice chair for our state arts council, working on arts advocacy and public policy, as well as being part of the National Arts Indicators Project headed up by the NDA. So that's just the side that you're not going to hear much about today. But I am going to talk about underimagined futures. And normally people ask me, what do I mean by an underimagined future? And I like to say, we could imagine the flying car and the Jetsons, right? But we couldn't imagine Jane working, let alone for equal pay, right? So that's an underimagined future. And for some of us, we are always persistently underimagined for, and we are definitely underimagined with. And I have a creative practice in studio with my partner, both in terms of our practice and in life, John Marshall. And our work intentionally has been situated at the intersection of participatory design and science and technology studies. My background is in performance and storytelling, then entering into public policy with an emphasis on science and tech public policy. His background comes from sculpture and installation, and then really enters into design via the sort of understanding of spatial justice, right? So we spend a lot of time thinking about preconditions of place as a through line through our work. And so that sometimes shows up, and what I like to say is we do thinky-makey work and we do makey-thinky work, right? So the first half of the presentation, I'm gonna talk about some of the thinky-makey stuff, right? We tend to work alongside values-aligned organizations to really try and understand through research and strategy and master planning what we can do to center artists and culture bearers, and particularly BIPOC artists and culture bearers in Detroit, in that work to create more preferable futures, right? And so in our work, we really don't prioritize solutioning. I think design all too often rushes ahead towards solutioning. Instead, we try and sit with and wrestle with kind of complex questions, and then really understand what it takes to get to problem framing and definition, not through us, but through the people who are most impacted, right? So it's not about how we frame a question or how we come up with the terrain by which we play, but really what is the set of consentful practices that bring all those voices into the mix as we consider what questions are worth addressing. And a recent project that we've done that was funded through the Kresge Foundation, so it does have emphasis on their 3 cities in particular, is Looking Back to Move Forward. It has just been released, not announced yet, but you can find it on our website. But it was really a study of BIPOC artists and culture bearers that began in 2019, if I can take you on the way back machine to that, right before COVID, where we were imagining being able to be deeply embedded in both Detroit, Memphis, and New Orleans on the ground with artists and culture bearers. By the time the grant was awarded, we found ourselves in the situation of having to figure out how to do PAR, but online. And in communities that were not our own. Like, we had networks there, we had relations there, we had contacts there, but they were not our own. So it really became a research challenge to think about how we would construct all of the elements of participatory action research as mediated by new technology within that work. And a lot of that looked like having to develop inventive ways, because midway through, we all hit that Zoom fatigue. We didn't want to talk to each other on a little square box anymore, right? So what we did is we thought about what is fundamental to this conversation of care. How can we make research be part of a care package that we could send to each other and work with one another through? And so we developed the Cultural Probe Workshop in a Box. It also was a way of supporting small Black and brown women-owned businesses in those cities, so all of the elements of that care package came from there. And again, we used design consistently to try and communicate and offer up opportunities for that to be as pluralistic as possible. When we started looking at the study, there is a fundamental way and often a totalizing way that we think about artists and culture bearers in this country. We primarily have a set of statistics through the American Community Survey that is used to actually talk about the demographic, the economic, the social conditions for artists in this country. I could go on ad nauseum about what it leaves out and why it doesn't work, but we found ourselves really wanting to have a source of triangulation for what is mostly a robust qualitative study. And so one of the things that we thought, if we're going to harness the ACS, what we need to do is actually really be a proponent of trying to figure out how to both hyper-localize the data. The data doesn't really work once you get beyond sort of state levels. It's really clunky and cumbersome to figure out how to make that happen, but you can, right, if you do the work. The other thing that is really important to note is it's increasingly hard to disaggregate that data the closer you get to that sort of hyper-local geography level. And what became important for us was to be able to say, where are Black and brown folks showing up in this data? More often than not, when we hear the stories, coming out around sort of artists and sort of culture bearers through statistical portraits, it actually is almost always not disaggregated. And so the picture is always very different in terms of how we think about housing, how we think about other assets and infrastructure and opportunities. And so on the slide, you're seeing a snapshot from digital inclusion, which has also been something that hasn't really been surveyed within the sort of artist population on this, though it is a fundamental set of questions within the American Community Survey. So we're one of the first to actually apply that to the artist creative worker population and then take a look at it within Detroit. But we go into many other things, including healthcare access, housing, ownership, all of those kinds of things within the study. But again, statistics for us is just a backdrop to what is the rich storytelling coming out of the artists and culture bearers in these 3 cities. A lot of that work with the ACS began when we were awarded, through an international design competition, we were awarded for the Cultural Center Planning Initiative to do the work around digital strategy and digital transformation. For those who don't know, in Midtown Detroit is where 11 of the core arts and cultural anchor institutions, and I mean that glibly, right? Because as an anchor, they are not very neighborly. They are not very welcoming, but they are building based and they are large, right? So we can say that. And that's actually an 83-acre part of Midtown. There is a popular sort of story about Midtown in Detroit that it is done, that effectively we have incentivized it, we have funded it, it is suburb safe, it is welcoming. But as we began to really try and dig into this idea of this digital strategy and master plan, what we actually found when we began talking to folks is that there's a real underlying story of both digital disinclusion, still high poverty, and one of the core neighborhoods for elderly populations in the city. And so when our narratives begin to outstrip the realities on the ground, we stop investing, we stop thinking about services, we stop thinking about connection. And that was when we first began to really think about the way that statistics could come underneath a lot of the design and research work that we were doing, but towards another end. So through that, we amplified that through workshops, convenings, conversations. Stephanie actually sat on a panel for us way back then. You did. It's online. I can prove it. But talking about really what it takes to do digital transformation in an inclusive way and in a culturally led way, right? And that finally has led to our most recent work on the thinky-makey side. If we were really trying to think about how do we introduce technology into a cultural center, we are now trying to think, how do you actually introduce arts and culture into an innovation destination centered around the reopening of the Michigan Central Station? So that just happened last week, so I'm a little tired. But needless to say, one of the first things we did was build out a strategic framework that really was considerate of what does it take to do art, technology, and society? How is that not just about the spectacle that we can all indulge in when we think about kind of art and technology, but where can we actually locate critical conversations? How do we platform artists who are often not seen as experts in these spaces, lacking appropriate credentials to be in these spaces? What are the things that we need to do in order to make that possible? And so while there will be commissions and opportunities, we really centered our work on a couple of key things, right? So what is the sort of public realm where we can really think about the urban informatic overlay, right? So yes, it's public art, but more than anything, it's also about really, again, getting to understand that technology is physical, right? Your access to it or lack of access to it is physical. You can see the way that technology and the lack of it shows up in Detroit based on redlining, right? If we're gonna talk about public art and we're gonna talk about work in the public realm, how are we gonna actually interrogate technology as part of that? If we're going to actually do partnerships and residencies, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, how do artists show up in those conversations in the same way that Black and brown founders show up, in the same way that other founders show up, right? And then finally, when we think about signature events, how do we make sure that this is culturally resonant in Detroit, right? It's gotta be both locally relevant and globally significant. And we know this because, again, there are aspirations for our innovation districts and our cultures of innovation. And so one of the first things that we worked on was a residency program. We now have our first 6 residents who just started a month ago. And so you'll find out a little bit more about them on the website. But basically, the residency program sits between Michigan Central and New Lab. It gives artists as residents access 24/7 access to up to $15 million worth of new digital fabrication, prototyping, electronics studio, robotics, equipment that otherwise they just couldn't get access to. Equally, they have studio, professional development, and they're given a $30,000 stipend for that 6 months. And so again, that stipend is undirected. It can go towards the production of work, but it was pegged at what is a living wage. So again, a lot of this is about how are we researching about making viable futures for artists. And I think we're a little self-interested. We want to have a viable future ourselves as artists, which is what I'm going to pivot into. So when we're on the makey side of our makey thinky work, we're really concerned more often than not with the things that frustrate us that we can't get access to at the system level yet. I don't know about any of you, but have you changed Facebook yet? Have you taken down Instagram? Have you got to a more preferable AI future yet? No. And actually, as an artist, I have very few levers to reach to that level. I can have better levers at changing grant programs and engaging with foundations than I ever will with like tech companies, right? And so for those kind of problems, more often than not, we find ourselves in this situation as artists trying to figure out how we interrogate the question a little more. And so in 2012, we thought we needed an early warning system for social media. We thought it would be appropriate to take up the mantle of an agrarian age informatic device, commonly known as a weather vane, and that it would tell us which way the wind was blowing in terms of social media, in terms of 24-hour news, that keeps us in this kind of heightened state of anxiety and fear. We did this initially on the southeast coast of England. This was before the Brexit vote, but you could already see, again, preconditions of place, you could already see what was manifesting. You could already see the way that news media was segmenting and segregating that community. And we continue to work on this project, thinking about it as both an open source hardware kit that could get into the kind of public education around everything from IoT to the coming of devices in our cities, to really trying to, again, begin to question, where does consent lie? Where does participation lie? There's a whole part of that project that I won't go into, but a lot of it was about the democratic dilemmas that are bundled up into it. And so citizens at the time were able to vote via Twitter by using the hashtag #KeepCalm or SkyFalling to raise or lower the threat level. Again, that felt very one note, right? Like, it is a perfect stand-in for the way that democracy works, by the way. But we wanted to go, there's another democracy possible, right? And so within that leads us to the project that we're currently working on, which is our Creative Capital 2023 project, Any Space Whatever. It is a deep cut from Gilles Deleuze via Adam Greenfield applied to the smart city with a sort of, maybe showing my age a little bit, valley inflection to the question now. But it's really this idea that if we really want to think about more consentful technologies within the sort of urban realm, if we really want to interrogate that urban informatics stack, we actually have to get to grips with what are the new civic possibilities, what are the new civic imaginaries that we need to co-create. And so all of this is to say we're working on everything from tabletop kind of workshop style engagement that begins to build and think about the storytelling that's needed to uncover what that preferable democratic future is for technology, to the museum exhibition version, all the way up to what will eventually be a pavilion. Part of this for us is about how do you get to radical privacy in a post-privacy world where privacy is no longer a right, but it is a marketplace, because you can already see at the policy level, if you're sitting in Europe, you have a very different socio-technical imaginary possible international than what you currently do in the US, right? Because we are not solving for fundamental things like privacy rights. So that is the project that I think we're probably going to spend quite a lot of time on for the next 10 years with many different outputs. But I just want to say, I think all of this is leading us to get to the point where we're thinking about how might we design technologies to sustain, heal, and empower communities and ignite civic imagination. I think we need a fundamentally different orientation to how we develop and co-create not just technology, but how we actually get back to that level of what is the social contract we need and deserve in order to thrive. Technology is just one part of that. So that is my time.
Thank you, Suzanne. So now Ria's going to give us a play interlude. Is that a good way to talk about it? We'll see.
We'll see how this goes.
Hello.
Great. Oof, I have too many things I need to control. Can I have the...
Hi, I am Ria. I am a MFA student at Stony Brook and a graduate scholar at the Future History Studio. Well, since we're running out of time, I'm going to go through this quickly. I am an intermedia artist and visual designer working across analog and digital mediums, focusing on the intimate relationships between people, places, and the technosphere. My work deals with ideas related to movement, space, and time, with a focus on intangible, ephemeral, and transient experiences, IRL and online, through performance, audiovisual experiences, image making, lens-based media, and video art. I've had the good fortune to participate in multiple public art projects, festivals, and residencies internationally. At present, my work is centered around ideas of embodiment, personhood, inner mappings, and ontological modes of artistic production. And my work examines the corporeal, temporal, and spatial dimensions of mark making and the various forms of residue these meditations leave behind. Just quickly, an overview of what my practice concerns itself with is materiality, spatiality, time-based media. My work is very process-driven and iterative, and practice-based research. And just been thinking about what a contemporary intermedia art practice looks like. These are some of the things that I'm involved in and interested in, and more recently have been focused on more performance-based work. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I've been flipping on my practice and research is thinking about the analog and the digital, hybrid expanded objects and interventions that exist online in the ether, as I like to think of it, and physically offline. I play a lot with overlays and filters and remixing of media and kind of experimental media. I've been thinking a lot about performance, performative, and practice and how these overlap in my work. And finally, this leads me to audiovisual live performance as a sort of embodied visceral experience. More recently, that has led me into the world of live coding. I was introduced to this during a tech art residency called Mars College in early 2022. And really what this did for me was that it opened up the possibility of working with sound and visuals in tandem using code. Disclaimer, I'm not a coder, I'm not a programmer. And so this really was an exciting way and a new way to get my hands dirty and then get into it. And as a visual artist, working with sound was really liberating. Without any formal training in music, my approach to sound is more intuitive and playful and experimental. And having a safe space to experiment was actually really crucial and critical to that process. Just a little bit about what live coding is. Live coding is most prominent as a performance arts form and a technique that's centered around writing source code and the use of interactive programming in an improvised way. And the whole sort of premise of this is that you show your code while you're doing this, and it opens up the process, and it makes it very much like in the moment and improvisation, which again, to me was quite exciting. These are some of the tools that I've been playing with. This is Hydra, which is an open source live code video synth encoding environment that runs directly in the browser. And alongside this is Estuary, which is also another open source platform for collaboration and learning through live coding. It enables you to create sound, music, and visuals in real time in a web browser. Do we have time for me to do something? Okay. Or I could just show a video. Okay, all right, do something. Okay, I need a minute to switch out. I'm gonna try and do a little bit of a demo.
I know this is like slow and painful in places and odd. I love the risk and failure that it takes to sit up and do this, because this is the place in which we start to push the boundaries of how we're working with the technologies and making them do or work in the ways that we want, and sometimes not. I will tell you that I think most of my work are failures, right? They're like attempts at doing things, but they're actually things that have failed, but have many things to teach in the process of their becoming, of their gaining knowledges, and of their living in the world. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm just going to rely on my computer speaker. Thanks. I am not sure if this is really working, but okay.
We'll give it a minute.
Yeah, but you can try and do both.
Well, you might get feedback. Give me the mic.
Okay.
So what you're slightly hearing is, I'm going to call it the bebop music that started in Montalvo this summer with Errol King, who is a technologist who worked at Google, and they were jamming quite often, surreptitiously, often in a house and learning these things, right?
This is just to show you the possibilities of learning on the fly.
Ria, what's happening?
It's
Is it changing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like big
You're like,
change,
you're good.
clearly. I'm like, where is the change and
Okay,
why isn't it
it's-
happening?
It's happening, I promise you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like a slow change. And I'm going to wrap us up so we can
Sure, that's
leave
fine.
time to talk. And if you want to talk to Ria about the system, we will let her show you later. And I will tell you that Ria and I always have arguments over this. I think these containers that are made for us are interesting, but there's and consolidating what it means to be creative in certain ways if we don't dig into them and get into the depths of what is possible and how we might change them. I'm going to try to wrap us up with a quick little ditty. I don't know what I'm going to show you. We'll see. I'm going to be about the same, right? But because of some of the things that we've talked about, I'm going to try to share one thing quickly. And I'm going to go straight to my computer, please, and see if I can get some sound too, because that would be great. I've been thinking about what do you talk about in this situation? But I've heard some overlap with this project in particular, so I just want to call it up quickly. It's called Binary Calculations Are Inadequate, and really it's binary calculations are inadequate to assess us, because back in what, I don't know, this is maybe 2000, I was thinking about why we stick with the binary as a base for code. I just do not understand. I'm a big advocate for spectrum gradient, right? And if we add more to the base code, we can get different outcomes, and we're moving towards different ways of doing things, but it doesn't make sense to me. And so what I was thinking about here is, how do we then describe ourselves? Like, how do we get to describe ourselves to systems? And is that even a thing we want to do? Let's see if we can go forward here. Let's go. And this project was this website and an app, I've killed the app at this point, that was trying to ask people to donate data, actually. So do the thing we're actually talking about, but do it really intentionally with the ideas that we think are really crucial to understanding of who, what, and why, and how we are in the world and how we function, so that maybe care is something that might be possible within the system, right? And in the making of this project, it was really interesting, because then we're balancing out these ideas of privacy and what and like why people would do that. Like, why would you do this? We've been having this argument here. What do we give up? What do we retain, right? How do we start to work this? And then the more I think about this, I just cannot see a world in which some information given is not the way, like that we have to give information in order to be cared for. And it was interesting, I was just talking to a scientist from South Africa who is working on a genome for Africa, because it is the most genetically diverse, one of the most genetically diverse places on the world. And he's talking about bespoke medicines. If we're moving toward bespoke medicine, how do we get bespoke medicine if they don't have the information to build it on? And this is the loop that I think about in terms of AI. Like, how do we get the thing if they don't have the, and it's a paradox, right? Because at the same time, we're trying to protect what we have and keep it. Although I also wonder about what protection means to information. Like, how do we get what we need in the long run, right? And as someone who just had a brother in the hospital getting a heart transplant, I want him to be able to get the most bespoke medicine there is possible, right? And that means, oh, maybe I'm gonna have to give up a little bit. I don't know what that is, how much, right? It's like these crazy debates, but I want us to be having these kind of debates around, oh, this website I haven't played with for a long time. This website is just asking people to donate things. It's the precursor for the actual webpage, but concerned with, let's see if we can go anywhere on this website, concerned with privacy. And in fact, in this thing, when we would ask people for their information, we were often talking them out of giving us the information as much as we were taking the information, and asking them to be really careful about what they were doing. And I can't go anywhere, so I'm gonna see what's happening on here. Let's see if this will work for me. And then I can go forward. No, it does not want to go anywhere. So I'm going to go to the next thing. I will say that I think this project is rooted in care and just trying to make something. And the imagination for it was, not only was it local, and I always say local. When I'm thinking local, I'm thinking my neighbors in Bed-Stuy that I'm talking to and we are getting together and working with. And like, I often imagine a Maasai warrior with a flip phone out in the desert also being able to contribute information to this thing. So we tried to make it as lo-fi as possible, and so that people could talk to it, people could send pictures, people could write to it. I don't know where knowledge lies and to what extent people have to communicate to something, so I just want to make as many methods as possible for contribution, right? And that's always where I'm thinking, like, how do we get this thing to move forward? Oh, I see what's wrong. I'm on the actual website, not the thing. And I think of this around what I call the wedding dress problem, right? We all know, we Google a wedding dress, what do you get? That crazy white wedding dress. That is not a wedding dress globally, right? And how do we get our systems to understand, right, and maybe proportionally represent what it is that we live? How do we offer that up? And again, I think they have to have some kind of knowledge of those things to be able to do that. Now, where that knowledge comes from, how you get it becomes an interesting question. And so we were asking people to define things. And then the dream of this project was to combine a lot of information, analyze it, and see what we're thinking about as a community or as communities, because many communities might be represented in this, and then offer that back into, and I often say, infect the systems that we use with this information so that they act better. And I like the infection metaphor just because it's fun, and it thinks a lot about not only what is taken away, but what is put in ways that are unexpected, right? And how do you do that? And this is the privacy stuff. So we would do workshops around this, which was funny and fun, but this is where that question came from, right? And you will see my practice runs around these ideas of questions that loop. So this, can we create these systems of care and generosity? I will tell you that often when I ask these questions, I get chuckled at. especially if I'm talking to computer scientists and stuff. And that always tells me where I need to work. If somebody's, that's not possible, I will inject love and they just start freaking out. And that tells me, oh, that's exactly where I need to start prodding you people to do something. And then what I think I'm doing is modeling little ways that show what a different system might look like. And what I've noticed is that people get embarrassed when I'm back in the system. So if I'm at Stanford in their computer science program and talking, they realize we're talking about the same exact things, and I'm doing it in a slightly different way, more broadly, they get prickly. So now it's just not chuckling at me, but I have to consider, and I think they consider a little bit, but that's why I just try to make these systems. And I want to ask questions like, how do you care about Black women? Like, how do we do this? And a question for you all is, what do you need to define and create the life you most desire? And I really think this is a question, and what do you need to let go of to get there? And with that in mind, care is a deliberate and unending pursuit. I'm going to play this quick little piece, and hopefully we're going to hear the audio. Do we have any audio? No? Oh, dear God. Oh, dear God. No, I will say, she says something like, what does she say? I should know this because she is me. All right, my people, I don't know if everybody is prepared to hear this. And she goes on to a speech about liberation, right? Liberation rests. Like, where does liberation lie becomes a question for me, right? And is it that holding on to the things that we have and know? Is it lending the things we know to other communities? Is it some kind of, I think a lot about overlapping communities. Is it some sort of overlap? Oh my God, we are so done. That is no fun. But we started at 11:05. We started a little late. Okay, so I'm gonna shut up and I'm gonna do one thing. Does anybody have any questions about all of this crazy that we just presented you with? Yeah? Yeah, so we're going to ask a few crazy questions because we did start late. So we're going to take back a little bit of the time. And sorry, food is there, and if you want to eat, go eat. It's fine. Yeah, but what are the questions? Like, we won't question each other. The questions I was thinking about for us is, what does that embodied knowledge of working with these tools do for the way that we think and use and present information and want to make pavilions about these tools, right? That's a crazy project to want to do. And how do you start to go, oh yeah, we're going to make this pavilion. Somebody's going to fund it. We're going to put it in the world, and it's going to do this work. Without any, like, we're a little, when I think about the way that we imagine into space, and then not only imagine into space, but actualize those things, it becomes an amazing proposition for me, right? Because it's not a small feat, but when it gets out there and works in some ways, it's beautiful. Any questions? Wait.
Hey, it's Aria. Okay, I have lots of thoughts, but I'm super hype about connecting maybe all of what y'all presented. And I was thinking about a Facebook group that I was in for Black women academics. So this is early PhD. And it was a group, and it had faculty members, and then grad students got added. And then there was like a moment where professors were like, nah, we don't want grad students in here. What are we supposed to do with that? We need our own space. And people were like freaked out about, there was this friction about what do we want to create space for them, but then we don't have a space. So like, what's going on? And I was like, we could just have a separate group, like a school. So I made a grad student, Black women academic grad student group. And then it became a monster. And I was thinking about your presentation about like regulation and what Facebook allows us to do and the algorithms and all of that. But then like live coding and the idea that like we can actively continue to like shift it or change it and use like contemporary, like people want to say things about DeSantis and they misspell his name as a way to continue the conversation, but not have the algorithm pick it up. And so I was thinking about your question about how do we use these technologies to create the life we desire, and what do we have to give up to get there? And I'm just curious from your varying perspectives about how in a under-imagined future we can both create, I think I love what you said, consentful technologies that care for us but don't leave us high and dry. Because human relationships do that. And so I'm just trying to, I'm trying to make, what do we do with the messiness of this might fail us, like you were talking about failure, but then like we can create something else from it. Like we can create the sex bot that tells us how to deal with FGM. Like what do we do in that middle? I'm just like curious in your own creation and thoughts and imaginaries. If we're there, how do we do this? I'm just, yes.
Anybody?
I'll just say, I think the thing for me about consent is you ask often and joyfully for permission, which means you are always radically informing, right? Our end-user license agreements do not radically inform. They are designed to disinform. They are designed to make us click because they are too long, too cumbersome, too involved to be actually good communicative tools about where our consent lies, where our privacy lies, where what we're giving up and trading for access lies, right? And so I think some of that falls in the way that we think about the fundamental sort of metaphors in communications that ride alongside the platforms, right? And what job they're there to do and who they're there to do it for. And we are not their audience. We are their consumer. We are their product. Our data is their product, but we are not their audience, because if so, they're not treating us with respect. They're not treating our bodies, our minds, our data with respect. And so I think the metaphor around consent is apt in that sense. What would it take for me to give up is for me to be joyfully and consentfully engaged with you, right?
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think a lot about this idea of, I think the conversations are so important so that we're thinking through what we're doing, right? So knowing when we are being used, right? But going in logically, understanding what you want out of that system, no matter what that system is, because it happens all the time across the board, big, small, with people not like you, right? So then how are you negotiating that to get to what it is that you would like to do, and how deep can you dig, right? So I'm thinking about not just being the consumer of the thing, but okay, I'm not gonna say be the programmer, because most of us aren't programmers. I'm not a programmer. I don't know how to do anything I've done. I've learned it's so true. I've learned on the way and just tinkered my way through, and then got help where I needed it, right? But decided on what the trade-offs might be and what trade-offs are interesting to make to see where we can go with them. Because it's always just an experiment in my realm, right? And that's what the art space does or allows for. Like this experimentation with things you may or may not know about to push somewhere. And I'm gonna tell you all, I am always working my grandmother's methodology, right? And sometimes that is going through, sometimes that is going with, sometimes that is going around, over, right? I just need to get what I need to move the people I care about, which can range from a tiny group at some points to a giant group at other points, to where I would hope we can think together, right? And I'm willing to put that energy in, because I think there is a willingness. Like, you have to be willing to give up some social capital and all the other stuff, right? But then it's interesting how that comes back at you, where it comes back at you from, where it's rewarded, where it's used. And again, now I want to think it through. What are my aims? Not just what do they want from me? Because I know they want stuff from me. I know they are extracting things. And if they are extracting, can I toy with what's being extracted in any way, shape, or form? And how do I bend things a little bit? I don't know.
Eyes wide.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to just, so the failure thing, I'm big on the failure thing too. And I remember years ago, because I had to justify working with like computer scientists, HCI designers in an Indian country, where our infrastructure is obviously it fails all the time. But it's not because we did anything, right? It's manufactured. So that's the failure, right? Like the Pew survey statistics that you put up. Yeah, the digital divide that's the failure of like market capital, like depending on telecom as a capitalistic venture and thinking it's actually going to help people who don't have a lot of capital. And so I've started shifting a little bit and thinking the arts in particular, I always work with artists on our projects too, because they free us to think, and there's such a pressure when you're an academic that your publications are like the truth, that they're like right, and that they're not failure, that their successes are what's effective. Or sometimes industry, if your work is generated or supported by Microsoft or some industry lab, they don't let you report on the fails. You're not allowed to. They're like, don't speak about that. You signed an NDA. So thank you. I just wanted to say thank you and say maybe we can like breathe into this failure thing a little bit more and find a more generative way to frame it, because it's part of innovation. It's the experimentation that is not supported and or not understood, that incredible, extraordinary daring and creativity. And even to talk about things, I really appreciate this project about FGM, because I know that there's a sort of a liberal conversation in a lot of CS spaces. We're like, yes, let's help the people of the world, right? It's that ICT for development think that's very much informed by the Cold War, right? They don't really want to help the world. They want to help make better workers around the world. But I really appreciate the FGM project, the depth, the courage there, the texture, because those are exactly the conversations that are not happening in information science or computer science, or even in some design spaces, because it's so filled with an emotional intelligence that is not represented or understood well, and yet that's the basis of creativity. So I just wanted to say thank you. I'm vibing with the failure thing and wondering how can we breathe into this together? Like, it has to be this group, because if we talk about failure with the Aspen Foundation, like that's not gonna go well.
Yeah. So I'm going to agree with you, and I'm going to say, yeah, this failure thing, I think we need to think of the systems that hold things in place, right? Because we're often beholden to systems, and they have specific expectations of what things are, and then we wash and repeat, right? Because if you want more money, what do you have to do to get more money to do the show? And then how do you start to break that or put a facade on it so that it's not necessarily visible what you're doing? I will never forget that Mellon meeting we went to, right? So the PIs went to a Mellon meeting, and it's mostly POC, right? Sitting around talking, but we're doing the same song and dance for POC leaders. And I just don't understand why we would do that, right? Why wouldn't we have some real conversation where we can seed it and send it out, all right? Thinking about what the human of us is, thinking about what the indigenous knowledges are, right? Thinking about how we port them in, because we have this opportunity that we do not get that often in a space. So why squander it? I feel like I sit in rooms and just sizzle all the time because we are reiterating the script that has been given. And I'm like, let's rewrite the script. We are teaching people to be academics in spaces. And yeah, you got to get beyond those bars, right? Understood. But how do you get beyond those bars? How seriously do you take the bar that is given? And where do you do the work that you want to be doing with that thing you push out into the world in a way that it makes it work, right? And then keep it going and do what you want, right? Again, my grandmother. You want to stand in my way, I'm going around you. Right? And if I need to make you laugh to have that, this is my last thing. My family is masterful at making white people laugh. Drives me. Now it doesn't drive me as crazy. It used to drive me super crazy, because now I'm looking at it as a skill, right? It's what is the skill that they have, what am I trying to say? That they have honed over years to be able to survive, okay? Not only survive, but do pretty well without losing self, right? And how do I not take that exact skill, but skew it so that I'm not losing the work put in through that ancestral trail to be used for whatever it is I need to do? And then how do I hold on to, I'm so interested in this ancestral trail and how we keep it and how we make those biscuits, right? And every time you were talking before, I'm like, the thing that's missing is love. And while we might get the basis of something from a computer, we still have to work with it and collaborate and shift it to get that thing that's gets missing. And how do you keep that in there, right? And I think that's important work for us all to do, whether we do it with AI